Hi, this time I'm going to review the Standard Bearer for the Flintloque Witchlands Dogman line. I'm also going to cover some basic strategies and tactics. If you haven't seen my review of Flintloque, which is an awesome black powder fantasy skirmish game, and my battle reports of Flintloque and my reviews of the other figures in the Witchlands Dogman line, I recommend that you check out the links in the description below. So let's get started. Let's take a look at the miniature Unpainted. It's a white metal miniature. All of the miniatures in the Witchlands Dogman line come with their bases, and as you can see, the figure is quite clean. I think I only found like a very small mold line that I removed immediately with my modeling knife. So the details are quite easy to appreciate even without the paint. It's a very sturdy miniature, high quality overall. I think I also had to straighten up the standard pole just a bit. Now I'm going to show you images of how the miniature is displayed painted in the Alternative Armies website. I also really like how this miniature looks. It looks simple but straightforward in its purpose of standing tall and proud despite taking enemy fire. And remember that you can purchase these miniatures pre-painted, so if you're not too much into painting your own miniatures, that service is available in Alternative Armies. Now, these are some images of how I painted the miniature. Let's start talking about strategy. When it comes to the national characteristic of Dogmatic Pragmatic, I don't think it's going to be too necessary. That is, you could only include this Dogman Standard Bearer because Dogmen are particularly affordable in points matches. So even if you have werewolves or goblins or elves as your main part of the section, you could just include this Dogman Standard Bearer to save a bit on some points, spend those points in something else, perhaps in some other skills and traits or weapons. So you do not need to include too many or even other dogmen in your section, because as a standard bearer, most of the time you are going to keep this figure away from where the battle is thickest. You won't be using this miniature to engage in melee or even mid-range combat. Perhaps you will engage in some long-range exchanges from time to time, but most of the time this miniature is going to be quite far away, possibly behind cover. So you do not need to move it at first all the time. You can easily do without that bonus to your initiative if you're worried about this miniature getting eliminated somehow. As long as you keep it away from your enemies, behind cover, and in line of sight with the rest of your troopers, I think this miniature will do just fine without you having to win the initiative roll all the time just to keep this miniature safe. Now when it comes to equipment, I think it's a good idea to equip this miniature with a pistol, because sometimes the enemy can get too close for comfort, and it would be a great idea to at least wound the enemy, inflict some hits so that the enemy potentially fails that check to activate, but that would be just an emergency situation. For the most part, you want to keep this miniature outside of combat. Not so much as the musician, because the musician needs to be playing all the time. The standard bearer has the capacity of still keeping that standard up while engaging in other activities, but this is still a very important target. Your enemy is going to be targeting either your musician or your section leader or your standard bearer to negate those bonuses in the different checks. Now let's talk about skills specifically. Big Bark, which gives you an advantage in melee combat, is not going to be that useful because you want this miniature away from melee combat. Flea Color could only be useful as an emergency measure. You need to be quite close to use your ability of Flea Color, of sending that cloud of fleas against mortal opponents. So this is really specific. You need to be facing off against a mortal enemy, perhaps werewolf and such. And you still need to be quite close. so this is just barely an optional skill to take, in my opinion. When it comes to traits, Boneyard, you also need to be too close to your opponent and the enemy would have to be undead. So this is too specific. I wouldn't consider it optional. I wouldn't take this trait. Dog Nose could be a useful trait because, as I was saying, being a standard bearer, this figure will probably be targeted a lot of the times by your enemy trying to kill this standard bearer so that you do not take advantage of the bonuses during the checks. So if your miniature gets killed, Dog Nose will give you a chance to recover that miniature at the end of the battle if you are playing a long campaign. As some of you may remember, Dog Nose basically makes it look as if your miniature wasn't exactly killed. Maybe it was just knocked unconscious during battle and the trooper wakes up, and using the Dog Nose he finds his way, follows the scent back to the main section. That way you recover this miniature, it's not dead, it was just lost. When it comes to flaws, I definitely would not take the Dim Dog Flaw, because it makes you ineffective at everything else. Melee, ranged attacks, you're not going to contribute much to the battle. And even if you decide to use the Dim Dog feature of being able to reload the ammo in another trooper's weapon, you would still need to be too close to another trooper. You wouldn't take advantage of cover and being in line of sight for all of your troopers and give them those bonuses in the activation checks. So perhaps Dim Dog would be barely optional. Maybe you will get a chance to use that reload feature of the Flaw, but I would personally wouldn't take it. You need to keep this standard bearer away from the main battle, from the thickest part of the conflict, and just align in line of sight so that you benefit the rest of your section. However, the Werewolf Antagonist Flaw, I think that's a great flaw to take for this miniature. Remember that the Werewolf Antagonist Flaw basically means that if you get this figure too close to your werewolves, in your allied werewolves in the section, this miniature will fly into a rage and attack your own troopers. However, because you're a standard bearer, you can be quite far away so that this flaw never activates, and you still benefit all of your section, including the werewolves, with the bonus from the standard. Now let's talk about tactics. Most of the time you are going to keep this standard bearer away from the battle, as I was saying. You are going to want to keep this standard bearer behind cover so that the enemy never gets that chance to fire at him, because even if you only take a few hits, there is always that risk of dying, and there is also that risk of not being able to activate, and positioning is going to be key when it comes to getting into line of sight, so that the rest of your troopers do not miss out those opportunities depending on the scenario. Maybe they need to capture the ground or protect someone or assassinate someone, and the standard bearer, in addition with the musician, they're going to play a crucial part in the activation check. And because Dogmen have some pretty decent speed values, Dogmen have good maneuverability when it comes to getting out of cover and taking a few shots and going back into cover. They have the speed to do so. So even though they won't be too useful up close and personal, they could use their pistol to take a few shots every now and then. However, if you decide to attack with this standard bearer, I recommend that you do it in coordination with other figures. Maybe other figures that are using pistols or muskets, or perhaps even specialized in engaging in the enemy in melee combat. This standard bearer should eliminate the enemy as quickly as possible. As soon as you are out in the open, the enemy can also fire at you, so you want to eliminate the closest enemy to this standard bearer figure. So I definitely recommend that you have at the very least one more trooper close to this standard bearer, or at least more in line of sight when compared to other figures in your section, so that you can support this standard bearer and potentially block the enemy from engaging it in mid-range battle, or even stopping the enemy from getting into melee range with this standard bearer. I also think that you should always coordinate the movement of this standard bearer with the musician, because if you use the musician with the standard bearer in a certain harmony, you will benefit the rest of your troops with a great bonus. That is the bonus from the instrument, and the standard bearer's effect. It's going to give a significant bonus to overcome those checks when you are taking heavy enemy fire. So overall, I highly recommend that you get this figure. It's included in the Witchlands Dogman line, and I will be reviewing the other Dogman line figures later on, so expect reviews covering those figures with basic strategies and tactics. And don't forget to visit alternative armies. The links are in the description below. Well, thanks for watching my review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. See you later.